Hey there and welcome back to another My Hero Academia video. And with the release of Season 6 of this series quite firmly on the horizon, I figured today would be as good a day as any to start getting back into the swing of things, to talk a little bit about what we can expect from the series as a whole. And also, to serve as a bit of a recap for what's been going on previously, and what the story is going to look like going forward. And of course, we're going to be dealing with manga spoilers in this video, so if you're not up to date, or simply have no desire to read the manga and don't want spoilers, you've been warned. But anyway, for starters, let's just have a brief recap of what we saw during the course of Season 5. The first major story arc that we saw during Season 5 was really just the end of another arc that we saw at the end of Season 4. The pro-hero arc that sets up Endeavor as the #1 hero in Japan and pits him against a high-end Nomu as his first real test of power and fortitude, and sets up his new rivalry with Dabi, who of course turns out to be his eldest son, but more on that later. We then had the joint training arc, where we got to see our new benchmark for where a lot of the heroes sit in terms of power levels. And we also saw Deku begin to develop his new quirks that have been stored up by One for All, as it's been passed down from user to user. We then saw the new Big Three go to do their hero work studies at the Endeavor Agency, where he cultivates their power even more, and starts to try to piece together his family life, and investigate the Paranormal Liberation front. Before we got an honestly rushed villain arc showing Shigaraki rising to power and taking command of the Meta Liberation Army after whooping its leaders, and then forming it into the new Paranormal Liberation Front, with which he means to bring the fight to the heroes. But not before he gets injected with a whole bunch of new quirks to truly make him All for One's successor and ultimate weapon. Whilst at the same time, the heroes prepare for the big operation leading into Season 6. So that's really where Season 6 is going to be picking up from. The lead into the Paranormal Liberation War. And this arc is probably going to be one of the biggest and most intense arcs the show has ever seen. I remember when it released in the manga, people were going nuts. And whilst the arcs that have come since then have slowly lost their luster a little bit as more and more people start to scratch their heads about particular creative decisions, at the time, this thing was getting rave reviews. People were hyped up. Everything was kicking off and we were getting some really epic moments again and again and again. And so yeah, that's pretty much what I want to go over today. What are the big plot points that we're going to see unravel during the next big arc of the story? And so with all that being said, let's jump into it. So the early part of the story focuses a bit on Hawks as he gathers up information that the Hero Commission needs in order to strike back against the PLF, where he learns that the plan for them is to attack a number of major cities all across Japan at the same time. And thus, to stop the carnage and prevent the rise of anarchy and lawlessness, the heroes need to strike first and strike hard. And so using all the intel that he's gathered over his time undercover, a plan's created for the PLF to get taken out all at once in coordinated strikes across the country. One major strike will be at the hospital in Jakku City, and features Eraserhead, Mirko and Endeavor as major characters, whilst another team, including Midnight and Edgeshot, assemble to take down the PLF's mountain villa. And for the most part, the work study students are going to be kept out of the early fighting, with their teams on standby in the mountains or evacuating in Jakku City. Although 4 students are actually in the Mountain Villa first strike team because their quirks are just that useful. And then on top of that, there's various minor heroes that are stationed around the country, taking out small fry members of the PLF, so like Slide and Go. And so it all starts off pretty well, with them managing to evacuate a bunch of people from the city and putting the fear of God into the creepy doctor guy. Until it's revealed that this was also sort of a trap, and that the doctor is a twice double, and that the heroes in the hospital are in peril, but no time for crying, cause Mirko's here to be the MVP of the battle, and finds the actual doctor pretty quickly, and blocks off his only escape by murdering the teleporting Nomu thing, whilst Endeavor and the rest keep fighting the other regular Nomu that attacked earlier. The doc then activates the various high ends that he has, and Crust arrives to help Mirko, and then it's just an all-out brawl in the lab. And I can already tell that this whole sequence is just going to be epic. And honestly, Mirko's a beast in this whole arc, but here is where you first really get to see her go all out, and she whoops ass and one-shots a high end, and she gets her arm ripped off but she keeps fighting. A true demon. And meanwhile, the Mountain Villa attack has also started, with Skeptic freaking out that they're about to be ambushed, just as Cementos lays waste to the building and the heroes charge inside. And obviously, this battle is less cool and less important, as this is not where Shigaraki, Deku, Bakugo, Endeavor, or Shoto are. But it does still have some cool moments, and we even get some Charge Bolt development as Midnight takes on the brief role of Team Mum to comfort him and inspire him to fight for his friends. And he actually manages to get a little bit of spotlight here, which, considering he's mostly a joke character in his appearances who gets clapped early in battles, is pretty nice to see. Also part of this battle is the confrontation between Hawks and Twice, with Dabi also getting involved in that, with this eventually leading to Twice's death. And yeah, that kind of needed to happen. His ultimate move is way too overpowered, and if he hadn't died at this point in the story, the heroes wouldn't be able to win in the end. It just wouldn't be possible. Although, even though he's a deranged murderer who wants to cause the deaths of numerous peoples, you can just tell that his death is going to be one sad episode. And at the same time, Tokoyami gets a showdown with Ridestro, who is once again destroyed in quite short order by Dark Shadow. And seriously, for someone with such a top tier quirk, this guy does nothing but take L's over and over again. And on top of that, Gigantomachia is just chilling in the basement, ready to go on a rampage when Shigaraki tells him to. And also Dabi, upset at Twice's death, turns Hawks into fried chicken, blasting him with flames again and again and destroying his wings, whilst taunting him and also telling him who he truly is, Toyo Todoroki. And luckily for Hawks, he's saved by the intervention of Tokoyami, who also gets slightly fried chickened as well, but manages to escape with Hawks. Back at the hospital, Mirko is once again whooping ass, but keeps taking more and more damage, this time to her leg. But she doesn't really have much of a choice about stopping, because she needs to ensure that Shigaraki, who's around 74% complete with his surgery, doesn't wake up, because otherwise he'll have more and more quirks and be basically unstoppable. And considering just how busted his quirk had become earlier on without extra powers, with the extra powers, he'd become far too powerful to fight. Anyway, she then gets her wounds cauterized by Endeavor, so that would have to feel great, before she keeps fighting like a complete psycho. Furthermore, in this section we also learn that when Shirakumo died, it was actually a Razorhead that they wanted. They wanted his quirk, but they had to settle. And all the while, Shigaraki, who the heroes believe is dead after Mirko smashes his capsule, has visions of his dead family, including his grandmother, with him basically telling them all to get stuffed and embracing his future, waking up, which then sets Deku's spider sense tingling all the way over in the city, with the first user even directly talking to Deku, basically telling him shit's about to go down. Because yeah, as soon as he wakes up, he unleashes a massive decay wave, which kills a bunch of heroes, most notably at this point, Crust, who dies saving Aizawa from getting dusted, so that's the first real big death, a top 10 hero. The decay then begins to spread through the city, with Deku and Shoto trying to use their quirks to slow its advance with no luck. Meanwhile, Shigaraki notices that a few quirk-destroying bullets have survived the hero's onslaught, and so he picks up the doctor's phone and the bullets, because now he can hold things because he can control his quirk, and orders Gigantomachia to come to his location, and bring the rest of the League. And yeah, that's what the big boy does. Toga slices and dices some more heroes before getting scooped up by the big fella alongside the other OG League of Villains characters. And Skeptic. And this is followed up with a massive battle between Endeavor and Shigaraki in the hospital, where Shigi's just really testing out his new powers and showing off how overpowered he's become. Before mid-fight, he uses his quirk to locate Deku so he can hunt him down to steal his quirk, and then just starts coming for him, ignoring Endeavor completely. Deku then panics and calls Endeavor to fill him in on what's about to happen, and so Shigaraki chases Deku through the city, whilst Endeavor chases Shigaraki, and Bakugo comes in to try and help Deku, and also gets some revenge on Shigaraki for kidnapping him during the forest camp. But before any real fighting can take place, Deku and Bakugo are then stopped by the intervention of Gran Torino, who gets them out of harm's way whilst Ryukyu, the dragon hero, and Endeavor attack Shigaraki, who is in turn being erased by Aizawa, who is in turn being supported by Manuel and Rocklock, but doesn't really matter, as even with his quirks being cancelled, Shigaraki solos the two fighters quite easily, despite his lack of decay and hyper healing. And so now Ryukyu is basically down for the count, whilst Endeavor is also sort of down, but is also not down. And so he, Deku, Bakugo, and Gran Torino now have to team up to fight Shigaraki. But of course, the mountain fight is still ongoing, with Mount Lady having a tussle with Gigantomachia, who defeats her relatively easily, whilst Midnight puts Momo in charge of figuring out a way to stop him before she's straight up killed by Liberation Front soldiers. Momo then has her brief general moment in order to come up with a way to take the big fella down, and basically the entirety of classes 1A and 1B that were out in the Mountain Villa raid have to team up to chuck the tranquilizers into his mouth. Unfortunately for them though, it seems like they wasted their time as they don't do anything. Yet. And he rampages through the heroes and goes on a path of destruction through city after city as he makes his way towards Shigaraki. But that's enough of the extras, because now it's back to the main event, where despite being a burnt out husk, Shigaraki is still fighting and monologuing and still managing to whoop some serious ass, breaking Gran Torino's leg and then punching him through the chest, which doesn't kill him somehow, but okay. And I reckon it's at this point that Gran Torino starts to think that maybe leaving Shigaraki's dad alone in foster care with no one else might have been not the best idea they've ever had. Anyway, the fight continues and Ryukyu's briefly back up and her hands get wrecked, before Shigaraki launches a quirk-destroying bullet at Aizawa, hitting him in the leg and requiring him to amputate his leg immediately to ensure he keeps his quirk. So truly, deeply badass. And I think one of my favourite parts of this whole arc is that Shigaraki agrees, and he's just a relentless Eraserhead fanboy. He just can't get over how cool he is. Of course, that doesn't stop him eventually just trying to kill him over and over, but baby steps. Eventually, Shoto arrives to join the battle, but Shigaraki's able to use the seconds where Aizawa's eyes were closed, due to his injury, to use his rapid heal quirk, and now he's completely fresh and fine again. However, since he wasn't in the oven long enough, his body's not able to keep up with the strain of using all these quirks. And thus, he starts to break down quite conveniently, so the protagonists have a plot reason to survive this very hopeless encounter. Deku then unlocks another quirk, Float, which is exactly what it sounds like, and really not all that interesting if I'm being honest, and he saves his whole team from getting dusted. Before we get some delicious Bakugo development where he starts to come to terms with his relationship with Deku, and it's revealed that he's been helping him train to maximize the efficiency of his quirk and try to unlock more of the quirks. And of course, in the meantime, Deku is also just breaking his body trying to defeat Shigaraki, because of course he is. The dude has no sense of self-preservation whatsoever. Bakugo then goes on to complete the next stage of his redemption arc by sacrificing himself to protect Deku, which of course gets him completely impaled. And then Deku enrages, and then All For One appears from within Shigaraki and touches Deku, and into the realm of vestiges they go for a battle of wills, where we get to see All For One interact with all the various different vestiges. And Shigaraki also gets to go angst at his grandma and blame her for the abuse that he suffered at his father's hands. Basically just give her a big old middle finger. And then, the next phase of the fight begins as Gigantomachia gets closer and closer to the city where all of this is going down. And the confrontations begin to get set up, with Dabi preparing to confront Endeavor, and Toga to confront Uraraka. And these two actually get a fairly decent showing, all things considered. Uraraka gets her big hero moment, she beats up Toga, and Toga runs away. I mean, it's not even close to as awesome as a lot of the other hero moments in this arc, but at least it's something, I guess. Anyway, at last we get back to the main fight. No more distractions, no more side stuff. It's the final clash of the arc. The moment that everything's been building to. And honestly, from this point on, it's just epic moment after epic moment after epic moment. And yeah, we have to start off with some more irrelevant heroes turning up, but no one really cares about them, before we finally get to the moment that we've been building to for years. The Dabi Toya reveal, where he unmasks before the world as the eldest son of Endeavor, and outs Endeavor as a creep who forced a quirk marriage, and as a domestic abuser / neglectful father. And honestly, this whole section, it's just great, and it really peels back all the layers of the entire family situation. And honestly, neither Toya or Endeavor come out of this looking all that good. But at the same time, you can see both sides of their clash. Endeavor started ignoring him, not because he thought he was worthless, but because he was too powerful. He had no cooling though. And thus, he could easily hurt himself with his quirk, so Endeavor, after years of building him up, had to try to tear him down to protect him, to stop him trying to be a hero. Although in hindsight, maybe just send him to a therapist? That might be a better start than just neglecting him straight up, but okay. Meanwhile, Toya goes from his dad's golden child to being completely ignored in favour of Shoto, which makes him lash out at everybody. His mum, who he blames for being too weak and giving birth to him in the first place. His sister, who he views as a weak girl. His brother for not letting him vent to him at all hours of the day. His dad for abandoning him, and then baby Shoto for replacing him. And he straight up tries to burn the poor kid at one point. Whew. And to make everything even more dramatic, he also hijacks all of Japan's TV stations using Skeptic, and has his mum watching the footage of his confession in her hospital room, which is just nice and tragic. The poor woman has spent years in an asylum feeling guilty for burning her youngest son, and leaving her two middle children with their abusive father, whilst also thinking her eldest son died a terrible, terrible death, incinerating himself with his quirk, only to discover that in fact he is a scarred serial killer who wants to murder that youngest son, and has also joined a terrorist organisation on top of that. But Toya's not done, because he also shows footage of Hawks killing twice, of course changing the context to make Hawks seem just generally awful, before attacking his character in general by telling the world that he killed Best Jeanist and that his father was a criminal, so don't trust him. So that was our first massive moment, and it was very exciting. And it's followed immediately by the arrival of Best Jeanist, who is not dead after all, and who manages to tie up Gigantomachia by himself. I mean, that's pretty impressive considering how many heroes the big fella took out all on his own, and then some high-end Nomus turn up, and they in turn get walloped by Lemillion. who returns in our very next massive moment with his quirk restored by Eri. Bakugo is also just not dead or unconscious, because who cares about getting impaled? He shrugs it off, and he reveals his glorious new name. Great Explosion Murder God, Dynamite. Big brain Bakugo waited until Midnight was dead to choose his new name so she couldn't veto him. The battle then continues for a little while, and Gigantomachia finally starts to feel the effects of the tranquilizer from earlier, and thus Mr. Compress has to sacrifice his butt cheek to free his allies and give them a chance to escape, and yes, that is actually what happens. He removes his butt. And so the League escapes, except for Compress and Gigantomachia, and of course, whilst that's it for the actual war itself, I doubt this is where the season ends. Because as always, there's probably going to be that cooldown arc at the end of the season. So I'd fully expect them to have Shigaraki and the League bust All For One out of prison, alongside a bunch of other villains to set up the next season, and then of course there's going to be a lot of focus on the hospital and the recovery of our hero students, dealing with the grief of the dead pros, healing their wounds, specifically Shoto, Deku, and Bakugo, the Todoroki family coming together as a unified front against Toya's wrath, Hawk's Best Genius and Endeavor forming a little coalition to fight the coming darkness and holding a press conference where they own up to their mistakes and pledge to take the fight to All For One and Shigaraki. And Deku has a massive talk with the vestiges of One For All, where he declares that he's going to try and save Shigaraki, not fight to kill him, which, yeah, at least he does acknowledge it is kind of a stupid plan at this point, but he really has no choice based on his own moral code. The hero schools then get turned into evacuation centers for the public as Japan enters its dark future, as a battleground for heroes and villains, whilst Deku gets out of the hospital and comes clean to his class about his quirk and how he's going to be targeted because of it, before he straight up withdraws from school and walks his own path as a hero. And so yeah, I think that is literally the perfect place to end the season. A massive, epic confrontation with a lot of key deaths and epic moments that really ups the stakes of the story, followed by a brief cool-off that sets up the events of the next season. And then Deku going off on his own for that tasty cliffhanger. God, Season 6 is going to be a banger. To me, the story just does start to dip in quality after this arc, but for now, it's going to be epic. I remember all of this story being so good week to week when it was first releasing, so I think the popularity of the show is just going to surge once again, and I'm very excited. But of course, with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about the upcoming storylines for Season 6? You hyped up? Maybe not so much? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.